Good afternoon, everybody. How is everyone doing today? I'm going to wait a minute here just to check that we're live. Okay, and it seems that we're good. Let me know if there's any issues with the audio, but I think everything is set to go. So, welcome everybody to the Sunday stream. I'm glad that everyone is having a wonderful Sunday so far. I hope so. I'm sitting here in my room at my desk with my cup of coffee, ready to go on with this little presentation I've got set up for you guys. So we'll just wait a few minutes for everyone to start coming in. I'm going to tweet out that we're live, and we should get started shortly thereafter. And we're live. Come join us. Another. Probably help if I tweet correctly and spell right. International relations. Okay. Well, I'm glad that we're seeing people come in and pour in. Good afternoon, everybody. Finami, Chris, Forrest, DC. I'm glad that you're all here. I am enjoying a nice cup of coffee. Eagerly getting ready to get everything started for today in today's stream. So how's everyone's week been so far? I hope that it's been a good one, and I hope that your Sunday has been an enjoyable, calm, good day, and all that jazz. Well, I'm glad to hear that everyone's having a good Sunday. I'll probably put out a poll, both on YouTube and on Twitter, asking in the future what would be a good time for this. I usually do this around 12:15, 12:30, just because that's when I get home from church, and I already have my presentation set up from the day before. But whatever works for you guys, I can probably make it amenable. If it needs to be earlier in the morning or in the afternoon, later in the day, I can definitely do that. So that's just some basic housekeeping stuff that I'll take care of. But yeah, it's been a fun week since we've done this last. Last weekend was Easter, and now of course we were celebrating over 1K, but now we're sort of back on track and back on schedule to talk about international relations and foreign affairs on the Sunday stream. I think that that's important for us to be aware of what's going on in the world. But yeah, no, so this week was fun, in part because I put out a video that I wrote this script in like a day. It was more of I was working from home that day, and I was just like, oh, this is kind of commiserating. There's no barrier between the home life and the office life, so to speak. And I was like, well, that's concerning. And I sort of just had that nagging feeling in the back of my mind. So I wrote that script and I put out the video. And I think that I had more comments and more sort of objections to that one than I did on the sort of e-drama video I did on the IDW, which I thought was funny. Then again, maybe it's just me not being able to read sarcasm in some of those comments, but I still think that there's a concern about the barrier between working from home and the other issues that we're noticing with modernity. And I thought it was important to address those in that one, but that's the only sort of comment I'm going to make about it. I'm glad that everyone's pouring in. It's nice to see the numbers come on in. HN, hello. Mr. Tuesday, I'm glad that you're here. Appreciate you. I know that you guys do a lot of comments and engage a lot, so it's always appreciated to see regular faces, regular names all come on in. So as I said in tweeting this out and advertising this Sunday stream, I wanted to talk about Turkey. And the reason why is that I thought it was fitting, considering that President Erdogan of Turkey and the European Union Council recently have been engaging in a series of talks, of course, in re-engaging the idea of Turkish ascension into the EU, as well as the more pressing issue, of course, which is the ongoing migrant crisis, which has been going on really since the West has been intervening more and more in the Syrian civil war. And although I don't even know if you can call it a civil war anymore, considering how much foreign intervention is happening in that area, primarily to oust Assad. And you could even argue, to an extent, that a good chunk of the Arab Spring of the 2010s, 2011 time frame has a significant amount of Western influence involved. So how much of this is organic, we may never know in our lifetimes until historical documents and records from intelligence agencies get declassified. But as they engage in these talks, I thought it would be important to sort of outline the historical relationship that the European Union has had with Turkey, both before it was the European Union and it was more of the European Economic Council and so on. So I'm going to put up today's presentation now, and we'll get started. There we go. And present. All right. So, as I've talked about, Turkey has got significant leverage over the European Union and has only increased its influence and leverage over that area. On a long enough timeline, are we not all screwed on a certain extent? I mean, probably, but at the same time, I think it's important for us to look at things in the current timeline, what we can do about it, and being aware of these issues. Yes, he does live in the USA under CIA supervision. So, and we'll be talking about that failed coup in a little bit, because the West did its best to try and make this a Erdogan false flag attempt, despite the fact that the guy that is, the de facto leader of that coup is, under CIA supervision and has been funded by the Americans for some time. So it's indicative to tell you that the United States and the West, primarily, through American intelligence pressure, but also with significant EU leverage, tried to remove him. But we'll get on that in a little bit, actually. Jayan says, it's something I've been wondering lately. Erdogan doesn't seem to have a lot of allies internationally, so what is his imperialist demeanor? I'll get into that, JNS, so don't worry. I'll actually answer that question in today's presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. We're getting a pretty decent number of people coming in, so I will get into it now. So it's important for us to sort of understand the relationship that modern-day Turkey has to the continent. And we need to, before we can even say modern-day Turkey, we need to take a look at the Ottoman Empire. So, to just give a brief background, of course, I mean, Prophet Muhammad dies in, 632 AD, and within 100 years, the sort of Islamic empire, Islam itself, spans out of Mecca into the Middle East, into Anatolia, into North Africa, and is stopped at the Pyrenees Mountains in 732 by Charles Martel. Now, in that time frame, you see a variety of caliphates rise, the Umayyads and the Abbasids, but what becomes sort of the last bastion of ancient Islam is, of course, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, of course, eventually sacks Constantinople. They remain a significant military and economic power in the region, although the decline begins to become far more prevalent by the 1600s. And from the 1600s onwards, the Ottoman Empire sees its decline both in political power, technology, and military strength, in part due to the fact that the Europeans are, of course, benefiting from the Renaissance, they're benefiting from the Enlightenment, the vast technological aspects of what would become the early modern era in European colonialism. But in doing so, towards the 19th century, you were getting the ever so prevalent Eastern question. What do we do about the Ottoman Empire, especially as European powers are sort of settling post-French Revolution? You have the Age of Metternich, the Concert of Europe, which is all sort of determining this balance of power. And of course, in order to try and maintain that balance of power, when you're dealing with questions about, well, what do we do with Greece? What do we do with the Aegean Sea? What do we do with Italy? What do we do with Cyprus? The question becomes, eventually, do we partition the Ottoman Empire? And eventually, due to the weaknesses of the Ottoman Empire and the growing militarization and industrialization of Western Europe and Eastern Europe, for the Russians in particularly, the Ottoman Empire's territorial holds over the Balkans disappears in, of course, 1912 and 1913 with the Balkans Wars. Serbia and other various Balkan states managed to ascertain independence from the Ottoman Empire. And of course, World War I comes around, and what happens from there is that the World War I happens, and the empire essentially is on the losing side. And in turn, the Sultanate office is eliminated by Ataturk in 1922, so the Ottoman Empire is officially gone. World War II comes around 20 years later, and after the war ends, the Council of Europe, which is not to be confused for the early renditions of the European Union, the Council of Europe still exists. It is sort of a aspect of economic and political cooperation. This is also the same organization that's in charge of the European Council on Human Rights. So you have that issue. But also at the same time, post-World War II, you have a Athens-backed coup in Cyprus, because there's still territorial holdings of the island of Cyprus, which of course has now been a thorn in the side of the European Union, because Cyprus, and at least the Greek side of Cyprus, has been an EU member state since 2004, and the other side has been, maintained by both a military and political presence of Turkish Cypriots, and it has the political backing of the Turkish military and government. So that plays a significant issue in the relationship to the continent, in addition to the fact that these are two fundamentally different sort of civilizations, and I'll get into that next. And, the coloring here is a little off, but hopefully you guys can read it. If not, I'll change it real quick. Actually, I'm going to just change it now. Oops. Wow. Well, there's the frog facts. You guys knew that was coming. Let me change the text color for that. There we go. Sorry for the technical difficulties there. Share screen. There we go. All right. So since the 1980s, Turkey has tried to join the European Economic Community. This is the finalizing steps of the Ankara Agreement, which came out of the 1960s to sort of integrate Turkey into the European Economic Community, with eventual full membership of that of the nation into what would later become the European Union. Now, the reason why I say there's a clash of civilizations, and I'm taking sort of a Huntingtonian approach, is that you have two fundamentally different worldviews. Turkey, for better or worse, is the extension of the Ottoman Empire. It is a majority Muslim state. It is not European. Historically, it has never been a European state or Western state. You can't even call it traditionally a European country. And despite Ataturk's attempts to modernize, at the end of the day, you still have to deal with the fact that it is an Islamic country. And in doing so, it is going to face the same challenges and the same issues that any sort of westernized democratic state with an Islamic population that is its majority within its borders is going to deal with. And as we talked about on the Clash of Civilizations stream about, I think, a month and a half ago, we've talked about how Islamic countries would be take a look at, the Western universalism, Western liberal values, and they see it not as the, how do we modernize Islam, but how do we Islamify, or the Islamification of modernity. And Erdogan is very much proof of that, and we've seen this in other states post Arab Spring. I mean, despite the issues of trying to take down the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, that is a natural consequence of Muslim majority nations trying to engage in democratic ideals and democratic policy. But furthermore, as we talked about earlier, there was a 2016 coup attempt. And of course, it was backed by the United States and others. The main leader has been under CIA supervision and has been led by Western-backed intelligence agencies, both the CIA as well as the sort of Five Eyes agreement we have with the Anglosphere. So, and of course, this crackdown led to Erdogan seizing power in the same way that we have seen other leaders that have had American and Western intelligence and military clandestine efforts happen within their own borders. An immediate clampdown of the civil service, an immediate clampdown of the military, and an immediate clampdown, and sort of diplomatic freezing of relations between the West, NATO, the United States, and Turkey. And so we've seen this from how at the beginning, about 5 or 6 years ago, inside the Syrian civil war, when things began to escalate under the Obama administration, that, there was big concerns over the fact that you had Turkey willing to shoot down Russian military aircraft with anti-air weapons provided by the United States. Since then, we've seen a radical shift in Turkey's relationship towards NATO and Turkey's relationship towards the United States and Russia. They've drifted further away from the U.S. This started under the Obama administration. It sort of cools down during the Trump administration, but it still drifts further because the American pressure on NATO under the Trump administration sort of pushes Erdogan even further away, in part because why is Erdogan going to pay more money for a military, institution that he doesn't necessarily see the benefits of, especially when NATO is only exacerbating a migrant crisis, that has poured millions into Turkey's borders, which we'll talk about in a minute. But not to mention the fact that Turkey has also been buying Russian military weapons as well. So we're already at a point now where Turkey is no longer in a position to where it seems to be oriented or interested in joining the Western project to begin with. It has abandoned the ideals of what we would consider traditional liberal democracy. And arguably, this is a response from the West, because as we've noticed in other democratic, nations, that the West likes to think is some sort of, a sphere of influence or underneath its hegemony, they will interfere with its own democratic systems. We've seen this quite clearly in Israel under the Obama administration. The Obama administration sent several campaign officials and Democratic National Committee operatives towards the Israeli elections to get the Likud party out of power, and by extension, Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, he failed, but it is indicative that the United States and other Western powers do like to intervene in developing democracies, especially the Middle East. Now, the reason why I'm talking about that in general is because this is the clampdown that happens from Erdogan. Obviously, having an open system like that is open to clandestine interference if you can control it. This is where we're seeing the more authoritarian aspects come in. And that's where we're at there. Now, so moving on there, we can see it's drifting away from NATO and the European Union. Which brings us, of course, to the more recent things that have been going on, which is the biological leverage from the migrant crisis. Now, the EU's primary issue, of course, is trying to stem the flow of migrants. We've seen since 2015, millions have been pouring into Europe. And in doing so, Turkey has been one of the many ways that people have been getting into the European Union, other than going through North Africa, primarily through areas like Morocco and Tunisia, and of course Libya, which is now a failed state, and trying to get through the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean, and of course engage through Greece and Cyprus. However, there are about 3.7 to roughly 4.5 million Syrian and other migrants and refugees from that area. Most of them men, most of them working age, and most of them are just trying to get the hell out of their area and into the European Union. However, since 2016, the European Union and Turkey have had a joint agreement on migrants. This is primarily meant to stem the flow of migrants into the European Union member states themselves. This has not necessarily been going with a great degree of success, in part because Turkey realizes the kind of power that they have over the EU when it comes to a biological perspective. Now, a lot of us on the Interact side will talk about, biological Leninism. This has nothing in comparison to what Turkey can do about the pressure release valve of releasing millions of people into the European Union borders, which is primarily the reason why you've been seeing Eastern European countries, primarily like Hungary and others in the Balkans, who have been so primarily adamantly anti-migrant, anti-immigration, and more restrictionist and putting up fences and walls, because they're the first ones that are going to be hit if Turkey were to actually release this pressure valve. And that's what we're seeing now. How has COVID affected all of this, JN? Hold on. I'm getting a sip of this coffee here. But COVID has not really affected in any way, shape, or form that you thought that would traditionally affect migration and other pandemics. I mean, it's still going on. Is there screening in some places at migrant refugee centers in, say, Greece or Spain? Yes. But it has not stopped the ongoing trade and the ongoing issues, that are happening. It hasn't affected them at all. And if these people do have COVID, or if they do have, the virus itself, it doesn't matter. They're still going to try and find a way to get in there, or they're still going to look for work inside Turkey, or they're still going to look for a way to smuggle themselves into the EU. It's not going to stop them. Fanami says, I'm not a big fan of NATO, but Turkey shouldn't be in it. The problem is that Turkey's in it as a relic of our actual Cold War with the Soviet Union. I mean, we had nuclear weapons placed inside the Turkish border, which is a primary, contributing factor to the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the simple fact of the matter is that because we have not maintained a diplomatic relationship in any sort of realistic sense, the one thing that, some libertarian-minded politicians will get right in the United States who criticize our wars in the Middle East is that you can't expect to turn someone like Saddam Hussein or Erdogan into Thomas Jefferson. And that's where we're at. Yeah, there has been a decrease in migration, primarily in response from COVID due to lockdowns and international travel restrictions. But it also has to do with the fact that Turkey has had money thrown at them to stop, any more migrants from happening. Not to mention the joint agreement has NATO and various member, signatory parties and their navies sort of trying to push agreements with North African states to stem the flow of migration. There's a reason why France has been heavily involved in sending billions of euros every year to North African states in the name of border security and infrastructure, which is primarily to keep migrants out. Because it's not just a Middle Eastern problem, it's also a North African problem as well. But yeah, and that's where we're at. But of course, this agreement doesn't mean much. It's tenuous at best. In 2019, you had, of course, the increased push to attack Kurdish forces, and that's a whole conversation in itself. You've had a Kurdish sort of ethnic cleansing, ethnic conflict between the Turkish population, the Turkish government, and the Kurds, really ever since the 1920s. Which is important to understand because the Kurds make up roughly 1/5 of the working population inside Turkey. And despite the fact that the Turkish Workers' Party, or the PKK, is listed as a terrorist organization, there's still a significant political and paramilitary force inside the Turkish government. And by extension, this means affecting the other Kurdish military groups outside of Turkey's borders, which includes the YPG, and other Kurdish military forces that the United States and the West had been backing in the course of the Syrian civil war. Now, in 2019, when Turkey started making advances to start attacking these targets in these areas, the problem that then came afterwards, of course, was the threat of sanctions, the threat of, reneging talks on European Union admittance from Turkey to the EU. And of course, Turkey just said, try me. We can release roughly 4 million migrants into the EU anytime we please. We will put them on boats and we will send them over there, which of course has been the significant position that has Erdogan holding more or less all the cards. And I thought that this would be fun to talk about because over the last few days, the European Union Council and the Erdogan themselves have been engaging in a series of talks on these very issues. Which, of course, has not been going very well, in part because Turkey has the advantages here. Now, the EU officials tell Turkey that human rights are the key to better ties, and again, we're seeing this civilizational clash happen. We are once again seeing that perspective of the Western universalism and this clash of civilization, and what good can they do? In part because the European Union is asking a nation that has virtually no interest in these values, especially because those values, as clearly demonstrated by the 2016 coup attempt, hold no true meaning. to the Turkish government at all, especially when they see that the European Union holds those in terms of empty words. It'll work with the Americans and try and oust us. But it was funny, though. I don't know if anyone's aware that the European Commission has been meeting with Erdogan this week. But one of the first things that happened is that Erdogan welcomes them. Of course, the European Commission president is Ursula von der Leyen, I think is her name. I know her first name's Ursula. And he sits the gentleman down from the European Council and some other members, and she's given no chair. And Erdogan's pretty much just telling her, "You're a woman. You just sit 5 feet away from me on the couch." It's sort of demonstrative of just these two varying perspectives. There's no, equality of the sexes coming from the Turks, and why would they? It's not like a primarily Islamic country is going to have a beneficial relationship or a neutral, egalitarian view of the sexes. So I thought that was funny. But the primary issues of these talks, of course, are dealing with migrants, human rights track records, and trying to find, a stable and secure environment for Cyprus and Greece as prerequisites for trying to get the talks to restart and not be as stalled when it comes to Turkey joining the EU. But to be honest, in my position here, it's not going to happen. These talks aren't going to go anywhere as well. People were tweeting about it as Sofagate. And yes, he did pull out of the Istanbul Agreement as well, which is it's pretty much like the Violence Against Women Act here in the United States, but on a European Union scale. It's a domestic violence and equality of the sexes sort of deal, and they pulled out of that. So, but the issue here is that the question that got asked earlier in the stream was, why is Turkey acting so imperialist? Why is Turkey acting the way that it does when it doesn't seem to have a lot of allies in the region? And the question is that you need to understand that despite the United States' recent efforts at peace agreements inside the Middle East, you're still dealing with this rather civilizational block. And this is where I really think the Huntington analysis is so important when we're taking a look at the relationship between Turkey and the EU. Historically, we had this sort of 1990s, naivety of neoliberal optimism saying that, hey, Turkey is democratizing, they're becoming more of a market economy. We're getting this sort of Thomas Friedman-esque worldview about no two countries with a McDonald's in them will ever go to war with each other, which, that theory lasted for 4 days because we ended up going, having interventions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But what happens, of course, is that Turkey can be our sort of halfway modern gateway into the Middle East, in part because it's an Islamic country, but thanks to Ataturk's secularization and reforms, we have our foot in the door when it comes to these affairs. But of course, this doesn't take into consideration the fact that the Islamic world has a huge amount of solidarity behind it. And for anyone who doesn't acknowledge that as a policymaker or someone who studies foreign relations, you're going to have that problem. In part because by not refusing to acknowledge the sort of Islamic solidarity, regardless of the different aspects of Islam. Yes, you have the Sunni-Shia divide. But in terms of nation states that exist there, which of course, whose borders are drawn up from a 1916 treaty by the French and the English, the Sykes-Picot Treaty, which sort of helps carve up the Middle East post-fall of the Ottoman Empire, where a lot of these areas like Iraq and Saudi Arabia and so on become French and English protectorates, but that's a stream for another day. But all of this, in part, becomes important to realize that Islamic solidarity is an issue there. So there's a massive amount of sympathy, I guess, for austere religious scholars and their attitudes towards the United States and the West. And that attitude is definitely translated into policy, into political movements. Islamic nationalism is going to be a factor of Middle Eastern democracies from now ad infinitum, until Islam dies as a religion or something replaces it, which I don't think will happen. due to the fervent nature of submission of Islam, it's not going away. And in doing so, any policymaker, anyone who wants to understand these relationships, needs to keep the Islam factor in mind. Are we going to bomb Turkey to make it stop? No, and Erdogan knows that exactly. And the U.S. has provided Turkey with an easy steal to nukes on their territory, indeed. And so we have these issues. Is Turkey is acting imperial because it can? Who's going to stop them? Syria, Iraq, exactly. None of these powers. We have created a power vacuum in the Middle East due to our efforts, both in terms of the Arab Spring and our intelligence and clandestine efforts there from the West and trying to prop up democracy and taking out people like Gaddafi and creating failed states in Libya. And by trying and essentially turning Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria into nations that are essentially these, puppet states of Western and, Asiatic powers like Russia and China, there's a power vacuum. So what are the four largest powers in the area in the Middle East? You have Turkey, you have Iran, you have Israel, and you have Saudi Arabia. Now, at that point, Turkey has sort of a choice to make. Is it going to sit by and watch its internal borders get screwed over demographically by a biological problem caused by its so-called Western allies, who at the same time will have no problem trying to instigate regime change against your own power base, which is Erdogan? Then what do? Well, you drift towards those in the... You drift towards those who are willing to defend you. This is why you're seeing an increased relationship between Turkey and Russia. This is why you're seeing an increase in foreign direct investment from the Chinese into Turkey. This is why you're seeing closer diplomatic relationships between Turkey and Iran. There is being a fundamental paradigm shift of the power relations in the Middle East. This is why Turkey has been largely excluded from the Trump administration's efforts at peace agreements, from Kushner's efforts to, sort of get Israel's, some slack and some breathing room in that region. And that's where we're at. Vichy is the legitimate government in Syria. I mean, at this point, the legitimate government of Syria is still Assad. Assad is still sovereign in that area. He controls 89% of the territory, and we're fighting and propping up rebels that can't even hold ground anymore. And of course, they're getting bombed by the Turks as much as the Russians and the Syrians, which is all more indicative of the fact that the United States has fundamentally lost any sort of bargaining position in that area, and by extension, the European Union and NATO. But von der Leyen is based too because she's the only white German woman with 7 kids. I bet you she's enjoying the ever-loving hell out of that tax break. But the progress of this talks, though, are indicative that Erdogan holds all the cards of the situation. And I mean, the European Union is so terrified of its own sovereignty being threatened by political instability domestically. What are the 2 greatest winning issues right now for right-wing parties in the European Union? It's anti-immigration and it's Euroscepticism. And both of those are very valid positions. And this is coming from, of course, an American. I lived abroad in Germany growing up as a kid. And to me, the more I think about transnational legalism, the more I think about the fact that the European Union project is fundamentally destructive to the nation state. It is the ultimate progressive project. If you think about what progressives in the 1940s were saying leading up to World War II, there was this sort of idea of eliminating nationalism and eliminating the idea of the nation state for a larger international authority. And the European Union, of course, is the ultimate embrace of that Wilsonian idealism, which, of course, abuses the Metternich Concert of Europe Congress system. And I could go on a whole rant on this, and if you'll let me, I will. Because from a right-wing or sort of reactionary perspective, you get the Concert of Europe 1815 from the Vienna Congress, which is like, okay, clearly we have to stem sort of these nationalist liberal attitudes. Primarily, it's more of a bring back the Ancien regime and bring back a system that can maintain the balance of power to ensure the total war that we saw with Napoleon can never happen again, and that can corrupt the notions of liberalism and corrupt the notions of the Enlightenment that can then be spurred into a nationalist attitude that leads to total conflict. Now, of course, this becomes the baseline for what we would later see of the League of Nations, and by extension, the United Nations post-World War II. However, the Progressive International Project in the interwar years in the 1930s and the 1940s, before the United States enters the war, is, of course, the idea of trying to abolish the nation state and abolish sort of this nationalist attitude. Even, the infamous Dr. Seuss, who gets canceled for his children's book and not his, progressive racial cartoons of Japan and Germany in the 1930s and 40s, talks about this a lot. And of course, there's this aspect of, eliminating nationalism and eliminating the nation state. And so you're seeing this corruption of the great, reactionary system of trying to bring back order to the international order in Europe. And of course, now what we're seeing, that project is, its sovereignty is being threatened by the desire to return. Their Euroscepticism and those anti-immigrant attitudes are a reaction to this internationalist project. And in doing so, the European Union is doing everything it can to maintain its sovereignty by trying to throw money at the problem. And during these talks, the European Union officials were willing to throw billions of euros at Turkey to sort of stem the issue of migrants as well. Currently, under the 2016 agreement, the EU offered Ankara roughly $7 billion to help, keep Syrian refugees and provide other incentives for, asylum seekers and so on to stay inside Turkey. Now, that's really all at this point that they can do, is throw money at the problem. Because if they try and throw and let these people in, or if Erdogan decides to release them, the European Union project collapses. You will immediately see an increase in anti-immigrant sentiment. We're already beginning to see that here. And just earlier yesterday, the Alternative for Deutschland party, the right-wing AfD, announced that they wanted German exit from the European Union as a primary party platform. So this is why the biological leverage really lies within Erdogan's hands, because if the European Union wants to maintain any semblance of sovereignty and any semblance of legitimacy, they cannot let this biological leverage enter their borders. And that's where we're at. I finished my coffee today in Oren McIntyre's mold bug mug. I'll take a picture of that later, and you can find it on his Redbubble. But and that's where we're at. This is the biological leverage, and this sort of biopolitics, to borrow a term from Foucault, isn't going away anytime soon. And in fact, you can arguably see the same sort of thing happen when it comes to Americans' relationship over here on our own borders with South America and Central America. Because as people like Razorfist have correctly pointed out, what is the greatest political release valve of shitty government and autocratic leaders in Central and South America? It's migration, it's border agreements. And it's the reason why anytime that you see significant economic issues in Central America, or if gas prices drop due to the price of oil becoming reduced, you will see massive migrant caravans move up towards the United States. Now, the United States can do only one of two things. One, it can throw money at the problem, as it has been doing. And then secondly, it will try and use security and, anti-drug operations, of course, to maintain some sort of reduction in violence and harm, which in fact only escalates the problem, which in turn brings back more migrant and asylum seekers up towards the U.S.-Mexico border. It does not help that, according to the United Nations, that the U.S.-Mexico border is the largest human trafficking hotspot on the Western Hemisphere. So if we want to make any sort of allegory, this biological leverage shows that really the United States doesn't have power when it comes to the issue of immigration, especially when you have that universalist liberal idea about autonomy, personal freedom, and the freedom of movement. And in doing so, that's never going to stop the problem, which is why you had Trump being the only one who could really do anything about it, being an immigration restrictionist and a reductionist in immigration, putting up the wall, putting up third, safe party agreements in that area. Um, and Ian says that feel when the neo-reactionary principle of exit is used to destroy America. And it's not. But the thing is that the neo-reactionary principle of exit isn't just a neo-reactionary principle. It is a traditionally Anglo principle. And as Nick Land points out in The Dark Enlightenment, the reason why exit's being used to destroy America is not that other people exiting or entering the country is what's destroying it. It's the fact that the people who are already here can't exit the situation. It's the reason why the term white flight gets used, despite the fact that it's technically considered politically incorrect, but it's used a pejorative against white people because, as he points out in his chapter called The Cracker Factory, escape is racist for white people. You can't leave and you can't enter without either, causing white flight or causing gentrification. So it's not that it's being used to destroy America, it's that the very option of exit has been denied to, what I would call, the traditionally native and indigenous population of America, which is, Anglo and European settlers. Oh, no, and I wasn't assuming that you were. I'm just saying that I think that there's a more applicable way to apply that term. Zoldor asks, do you think recognizing the cartels as a de facto governments would help with the immigration issues in the United States? I think it would probably help that if the United States would probably stop doing things to fund them, that would help. If we stopped selling them arms, and if we stopped sending money to security issues, which inevitably gets put in the money of the cartels anyway, that would definitely help. I think that the argument about legalizing drugs or decriminalizing them, that wouldn't help, in part because the immigration problem is Operation Fast and Furious was retarded beyond belief. But I mean, it does not help that the cartels are significantly propped up financially in assistance by the American government, not just through arms. But the other issue is that even if you were to take like the Cato Institute or the progressive approach and say, okay, we're going to start decriminalizing marijuana and other drugs, and that will decrease demand. One, it doesn't decrease demand. If anything, it increases demand. And then two, what happens next is that even if you were to somehow magically reduce the amount of drug money that's being, given to the cartels as a revenue stream, they already have alternative revenue streams. These people own factories. These people launder money through actual businesses, not to mention the billions of dollars they make every year in human trafficking. You're not targeting the actual structural problems, which is, of course, A, revenue streams, B, actual legitimate businesses, and 3, you're dealing with a government that has essentially been bought out. It's a failed state at that point. And the fact that we're trying to treat these governments, especially like AMLO's government of Mexico, as somehow legitimate, despite the fact that the United States has been weakening the Mexican government, both through NAFTA and through security agreements and through border agreements and through drug policy. We have essentially hollowed out the Mexican government's last semblances of legitimacy. And now we're at a point where in the last several years, you have seen literally the citizens just try their best to defend themselves because the government can't do it. La autodefensa. And that's where you're at. But yeah, I mean, hold up, I thought Tradcast loved more Latino immigration. I wouldn't know. I'm not a Tradcast, but I if that's the case, I mean, the funny thing is that even if that's true, the Pew Research Center has noted that, I mean, the longer that Hispanic Americans, I know to use such a blanket term, but the more Latin Americans become more, anglicized in the United States, the more and more they become evangelicals and they become less Catholic, which I think is interesting if you wanted to look at things from, say, a traditional political approach of engagement in voter, voting patterns. I would argue, though, Pedro, that they don't need to declare themselves. We kind of already know that they rule certain parts of the states. So, I mean, it's not like it's going to happen. Like, I don't think that they need to declare themselves. I think that all they have to do is keep the racket going, because this is how you get rich and this is how you maintain control over large swaths of territory. And that's where we're at with that issue. I just thought that it was an interesting comparison that, you know, Erdogan has a biological leverage over the European Union in the same way that there's a biological leverage over the United States when it comes to the issue of migrant caravans. And even if you do see, you know, a decreased birth rate and a decrease there, I mean, there's people that are still going to travel through the border that aren't necessarily from Central or South America. I mean, all people have a servant's entrance into the mansion. And that's why you've been seeing a lot of Chinese, you know, Iranian, Middle Eastern nationals come in through the border, a lot of Haitian and a lot of African migrants as well that have been caught by Customs and Border Protection through the U.S.-Mexico border. It's not just, you know, South and Central Americans. I remember someone on JRE saying that there will be a U.S. military intervention against the cartels by 2025. How likely do I think that is? Highly likely. If not, it's already happening now, or it has been happening through clandestine operations. We have billions of dollars in budgets that the average citizen isn't supposed to know about. I would not be surprised if we're already doing it, and that we have been funding and supporting the cartels through some sort of financial or monetary means for the last several decades. I would not be surprised. And keep in mind that a direct American intervention in this area really starts escalating the violence in Mexico sometime during Vicente Fox's presidency in 2006. So that there's a lot to be said that the United States has already been involved in some factors since then. AMLO is basically Mexican Trump now. It's kind of funny, except that AMLO is more of a leftist than he is than Trump's sort of rightist perspectives. But yeah, and most people do overstay their visas. They don't sneak over the border. That is true. We do have a visa overstay problem, which definitely doesn't help either. America's position on immigration is so fundamentally fucked that we can't have an honest to God conversation about it. And what bothers the hell out of me, of course, is that we can't even address sort of the social issues there. Philip Cafaro talks about it in his book, How Many is Too Many? The Progressive Case for Lowering Immigration to the United States. But even then, he talks about it in such a walking on eggshells way that we can't have that conversation. And which is why I think that the whole trying to cancel Tucker Carlson's little replacement argument is funny, because he's acknowledging the underlying problem that everyone has with the increased numbers in immigration, and no one seems to want to address the elephant in the room, but I'm glad somebody is. The men who join the cartels need to have a greater loyalty to the state or some higher purpose than acts against the cartel before they collapse. The real death of the Italian mob families was when Italians realized they're more American than they are part of the family. Well, I mean, that's an interesting perspective, DC. If you have any articles or literature about that, I'd love to read that. I might do a whole stream on the Italian mob if that's the case, if Americanization is what did it. Let's see here. I would hesitate to actually move on Russia until a successor to Putin is declared, and it's clear that he will continue to oppose the West. I mean, the argument to consider with Russia and Putin is that the United States has fundamentally threatened Russia in terms of like geographically. So I mean, we've talked about this before on stream, and we've talked about this before in various times where I've talked about America's greatest mistake after the fall of the Soviet Union, right, was essentially encroaching on Russia's iridescent territorial claims through the expansion of NATO and through the expansion of the European Union, to a point now where the European Union and NATO allies are more or less right on Russia's border. Which of course is an issue, because that means that you're threatened and that you've got a significant, threat right on your border of a nation state that promised you that you would be given the respect and the geographic space that we promised at the fall of the Soviet Union. And we reneged on that promise. Both the European Union, NATO, and the United States did. So the idea of Russia ever going to, be pro-Western is probably not going to happen. And I think whoever succeeds Putin is most likely going to continue that attitude. So, okay, Red asks, can someone explain to me how America having 1.7 kids per person fertility rate and having low immigration is sustainable? All of this means is that economic stagnation and the country getting weak. Okay, so there's an issue with this premise, Red, and the issue is that this would assume that the fertility rate stays the same. Which one, I mean, it's not necessarily a stable number. It's not like that this is going to stay at 1.7 forever. Two, I would argue that a low immigration position or a significant reduction in immigration would significantly improve the economic status, especially amongst the working and industrial class. This would make it a lot more likely that you could reshore businesses here to the United States because you're no longer being dependent on essentially what is a serf class of cheap immigrant labor. And in doing so, by improving an economic situation, there's a direct correlation between improved economic situations and birth rates. I would see a significant increase in birth rates from that area as well. Not to mention that this is an average. I don't know where you're getting that number, but it's important to realize that the birth rate numbers themselves vary from ethnic group to ethnic group. So it's not like it's necessarily going to stay stable at that position forever. I think it's just important for us to recognize that looking at things at the way that they are and not how they would change in response to policy is taking a lot out of consideration there. And that's my issue with that, on that argument there. Prudentialists, why are we even rooting for the US or the EU and their interests in Russia being bad? The West has become a force of evil and must be destroyed. Okay, so I get... Here's my fundamental issue with that. Okay, so I don't like the EU. I don't like the United States' current position on foreign policy. I have a huge issue with how the neoliberal model works. However, it is between the devil I know and the devil I don't know. And here's the thing. People who talk about how Russia or Assad or China would be welcomed as liberators, they're not. We would be looking at them in the same way that the Polish looked at the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union took back parts of Poland from the Nazis in the 1940s. We're going to look at them as liberators the one day, and then they're going to rule over us and kill us in mass graves the next. And I know that I hate using World War II analogies here, but that it's applicable in this situation. These guys suck. I'm not a fan of the EU. I don't like what NATO does most of the time. I don't like how the US operates its foreign policy and how it exports woke techno capital as its primary means of soft power outside there. However, as someone who is an American citizen, who's someone who recognizes that there are avenues to change the regime internally, there are people that are working to fix the system and calling it out for what it is. I would much rather have a multipolar world of, hegemonic powers and influences than the United States being in the West completely destroyed. There are aspects of Western civilization that suck out of our current liberal state, and that blows. However, you do not want everything gone. You don't want it to be completely destroyed. Because, again, you're in it. There are millions of people in it. And as we've made it very clear with our analysis of power and how the world works in terms of like the cathedral, the symposium, and how power is distributed here in the West, a lot of us have no power. And a lot of us have no agency. And I can't in good conscience advocate for that sort of culture and that sort of, all those people to be affected because they're powerless. And this is why you will hear me be very much an adamant proponent of localism, engagement in your local community, because internationally we have no power. We cannot run a government. Most of us probably couldn't run, a local small town unless we had that background in a business running or some sort of executive position. So at this point in time, yeah, I can't advocate for that destruction. I can't in good conscience. Views on Putin as a person. Putin as a person, Locke, I mean, I'm not a fan of him personally. I mean, keep in mind, he is an intelligence, operative. He is the leader of, unfortunately, right now, a state that is a rival to my country in terms of power politics. However, he is defending his nation from Western interests. He is defending the sovereignty and the identity of his people. And I, for one, can respect that. And that's what it is in the game of great powers. Fanami says, the game of great powers now is to figure out how to play Turkey, Iran, and the Saudis and Israel off of each other. Well, I mean, the battle lines for that have been drawn, right? It's Turkey and Iran versus Saudi Arabia and Israel. And Saudi Arabia and Israel don't like each other, but they hate Iran way more than they hate Israel. And Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, has to play ball with Israel because Saudi Arabia, at the current point in time, at least to the extent of my knowledge, yet has received nuclear weapons or has developed nuclear weapons on their own. Although they have considered buying nuclear weapons and fissile material from the Pakistanis, but I don't think that's ever happened yet. So that's what you'll see happen. But of course, Turkey and Iran are backed by the Russians and the Chinese in the area, and by extension, that pits the United States versus the West there. It comes down to a strategic stalemate due to the fact that nuclear weapons are a thing. This is why populist Euroscepticism should be focusing on co-opting the EU instead of its dissolution. And I would agree with that. Like, there's the European Union, for better or worse, still has significant infrastructure that can provide a common defense and provide sort of the necessary economic counterbalance to other great powers. Because in all reality, the individual European states do not have the economic means, population, or military strength to project power in, say, the way Russia, China, Israel, or the United States can, right? And so the European Union provides, I think, anyone with a Eurosceptic mindset that doesn't like the institution, it still provides you an economic way to sort of address these issues. I think it needs to be done so more like the German Confederation post-Vienna Congress, where it's very loose, very federalized, very much respecting the sovereignty of the internal states. Apes strung together. I mean, yes, but I mean in a way that respects in that way. How is Russia a threat? They're a backwards, corrupt petroleum state with collapsing demographics. They have a GDP smaller than Texas. So Russia, I don't even consider Russia a threat. At least I don't. I think the biggest concern is that you had American and European policymakers at the end of the Cold War did not want the rise of a resurgent Russia to do, any sort of equal power or threat to the balance of power that the Soviet Union did for about 69 years. And so, one, you quote unquote liberalize the markets, which created a corrupt oligarchy. You created a system in which there is widespread poverty and widespread infrastructure issues on international trade. Russia, of course, recognizes this. And if you read Alexander Dugin's The Foundations of Geopolitics, you can get a translated copy PDF online for it. Those issues are adequately identified. Now, the way that you fight back, of course, is through, disinformation, politics, pressuring, ethno tensions inside the United States, and of course, utilizing natural resources. Even people like George Friedman of strategic forecasting have identified that. The petroleum state is still necessary because there are nations that require that sort of liquid natural gas to be bought and purchased to keep things on float. This is why the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is such a huge issue. I don't even consider Russia a threat. I mean, Russia is a threat in the way that it can provide military technology and assistance, and it has its own military apparatus for technological advancement and also, R&D. But I mean, they can't project power the same way that we can on a demographic scale and an economy scale. What they do have, however, that is a significant advantage, and I will give the Russians this, is one, their ability to innovate, and then two, is that they have their own industrial base inside their own borders. That's their two largest advantages, but I wouldn't even call them, personally, to me, a threat. No one is talking about the US or Europe being completely destroyed. Well, I mean, someone earlier in the chat did say destroyed. We want our rulers to lose power, and for that, Russia, China, etc. may be helpful. Yes, but again, it comes to the question of the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. Like, your entire worldview and our entire world as we know it is due to a Western-led international order and a Western-led, opening of trade, control of the Navy, all that. If you were to change the political paradigm, which respected more of the rule of law, the national sovereignty of countries' borders, and we dropped a lot of this woke shtick in terms of our soft power exporting, things would probably be a lot better. But I do not think that it would be beneficial for China to start having control of the seas, China to have started in control of the marketplace globally, although they're winning on that front. There are numerous issues I have on those grounds. The West wants Russia's resources without Russian independence. Yeah, and that's the big issue there, is that you have the problem, of course, of what's the word I'm looking for? It's the problem of Western liberal universalism, and we've talked about that on the Clash of Civilizations stream, and we've talked about that in my video on deterritorialization and reterritorialization. That sort of universalism is the guiding factor of sort of the political ideology of what you see out of the idealism that unfortunately has won since 1919 to present day. But maybe military technology, and that's what I'm referring to in terms of innovation, is military technology. Russian innovation is potentially no. If I had cartel money, do you think I'd be doing this, shilling a subscribe star? No. What do I think is the future of Europe's conservatives? Many of them have become radical and even racist. So that's a good question for, I think, a stream with some actual European guests, because if not, you're just going to get an American pontificating on this issue. My position is that the future will be more anti-immigration and more of a return to national sovereignty. Europe is a continent. The continent itself has thousands of years of history, clearly defined ethnic regions and borders that I think will not go away anytime soon. Despite the attempts to create this sort of European identity, people revert back to what has been culturally ingrained in them for thousands of years. And I don't think that that's going away anytime soon. And I think that as the tensions and the lack of assimilation and integration of its new migrant populations into its borders become increasingly clear, you are seeing almost a nation of the saints situation come up, and that's not what anyone wants. Europe is carved too deeply to allow anything stronger than the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, by extension, yes. I mean, just out of the nature of the various ethnicities and borders there. And I mean, as Michael Pops points out with populism, at least in the UK, has been disposed of because it served its purpose in destroying our far right. I mean, not to mention that the European Union did everything it could to make Brexit as painful and as dragged out as humanly possible, to let other Eurosceptics know that this is the cautionary tale against them, and that's where we're at. And also read about a 5th-gen fighter out with the Russians. Okay, great. Let me know how well the F-35's doing and how many hundreds of billions of dollars we've wasted on that. We can't even get one out, to a point now where we're even having American engineers have to reverse engineer our own stealth technology to make it work. Like, I appreciate you playing devil's advocate and trying to point things out, but it's just like, we're not doing any better. And at least they have their own industrial base. We don't necessarily even have that. Do you think the EU will remove Article 51? No, of course not. They won't remove it. Why would they remove something that makes Euroscepticism like that so damaging? They've literally made the UK's Brexit the most prime example of why anyone who wants to invoke Article 51 not to do it, because then you'll end up like the UK, and God knows how well Brexit has gone, despite the fact that I'm an advocate for it. The European Union clearly won that battle between the UK and the EU. Do you think France will get on Brexit? No, I don't think that the right wing in France has a chance right now, especially as Macron politically maneuvers more towards the right on certain cultural and identitarian issues. It'll do him well for the upcoming election, but I don't think that you'll ever see Euroscepticism leave, especially when France has too much to benefit from, when Macron has been too adamant about further military integration and less dependence on the United States in that area. So no, I don't see that happening. But yeah, this has been a long, sort of drawn out Q&A conversation with you all in comparison to what we originally talked about, which of course is about the Turkey-EU relationship. At the end of the day, Turkey is going to continuously take advantage of its foot being in the door with the EU and its foot moving closer and closer towards the east of Russia and China. And the fact that it can significantly use both its biological leverage and the fact that it can have significant diplomatic relationships with Assad and the Ayatollah in Iran, it is indicative of the fact that despite its traditionally Western on paper structure of government and its relationships with the United States and NATO, Turkey, at the end of the day, is going to be holding a significant amount of power in the Middle Eastern affairs for decades to come. That is the primary conclusion that you need to be taking away from this sort of presentation. And that's important to sort of identify here. This is that Turkey is not going away, is a thorn in the side of the West anytime soon. And even if the regime that we don't like in the West is replaced or changed, we're still going to have to deal with the fact that there is now going to be decades of mistrust between Turkey and the West, and it's not going away anytime soon. And that is the conclusion that we have here. I thought having to reverse engineer the F-35 was a bio-Leninism thing. I mean, partially, yes, but at the same time, I mean, the stealth technology thing also is indicative of vast amounts of money being thrown at the problem, over bureaucratization, tech information not being adequately shared between contractors. Like, we have a huge bureaucratic mess and nightmare when it comes to American R&D, which makes it incredibly difficult for us to put new technology out. Everything is done by committee. There's not a streamlined process. Things have to go through congressional approval. We have to have hearing after hearing after hearing. Like, we have the technology and we have the means to create new things and innovate, but we are so hampered by the ability or our inability to actually get anything approved and to get anything out there. It's ridiculous. Like, so one, it's partially a bio-Leninism thing because, we're going to have all these lower individual people in there. It's just an issue. Like, I mean, we've become so over compartmentalized and over bureaucratized. Like, it's frustrating. But I mean, the other issue that when it comes to innovation that the United States has a problem with, of course, is also an issue of new blood. And I say this because I know people who work for Raytheon, and you have multiple engineers in multiple departments with people who are past the mandatory retirement age for Raytheon that are still working there, and there's not enough younger people to replace them. So, Red, okay, I'm just going to ask up front, like, what is your political view? Like, I just need to know what I'm working with here, and so I can engage in good faith. Import the third world, have third world tech. Yeah, it's pretty much where we're at. No, Locke, I don't think Texas will secede. And if the option of that sort of secession and exit was answered in 1861 when the United States federal government declared war on the Confederacy, you will never see that happen again. And yeah, every new fighter does have issues, but I'm not sold on it. I'm not sold. But I hope to be proven wrong. And I might do a whole report on the F-35 and see if I can come to your conclusion, Red. In fact, I might. Forrest asks, how can the EU fall? Internally, this is why the EU is working very, very hard to maintain a good relationship with Turkey on the issue. But yeah, the EU is not going away anytime soon. And even if it were to go away, it would probably turn into some sort of similar European project or some sort of reversion back to an economic community thing. But it has become too far ingrained into the system to not... It's not going away anytime soon. But yeah, so like the conclusion to draw away from all of this, despite our variety of digressions, is that Turkey is still a major power player. It has a biological weapon, which of course is the migrant crisis, which will threaten the European Union's sovereignty, which would engage in more domestic political issues internally with inside EU member states, and will be drifting closer and closer towards Iran, Russia, and China as it recognizes that as the United States tries to maintain a semblance of power in the region. Our Americans' ability to project power is significantly reduced by the fact that there are more power plays by the Russians and by the Chinese in that area. You can take a look at this by Iran's pretty much having its militia and Revolutionary Guard pretty much have a regulatory capture of the entire Iraqi government and its parliament. But yeah, that would be the conclusion to draw on that issue. Turkey also has like 3 million gypsies. Let HBD do its thing. Do not worry about Turkey. Well, if that's the case, then we don't really have to worry in the long run now, do we? But I mean, at the same time, they've also got millions of Kurds, and the further west you go, if you wanted to look at the HBD data, I mean, that's definitely an issue there. Prudentialist, my opinion is that Trump gained more power over the GOP since being kicked out of the White House. Thoughts? I mean, he's a living ex-president. He wields an incredibly high amount of power, so I'm not really surprised. And I mean, so I mean, I don't know if they have too much power now. I mean, it'll depend on what the 2022 primaries look like in the various House and Senate races. Depending on how well his endorsements go, that'll go for there. Turkey's main demographic problem is the Kurds. As I mentioned earlier, they make about 1/5 of their working age population, and I think that provides an interesting, issue there, especially when you've been thinking about the Kurdish question in Turkey since the 1930s and the ethnic problems there. Oh, but yeah, that is the little presentation I had drawn up for today's Sunday stream over the leverage Erdogan has over Turkey. And so now we can take a couple of questions. We can go over the other stuff that we've been talking about, and then I'll wrap it up with frog facts at the end, and then we'll call it a day. Let's see here. I'm making a script on a video about why the modern man is depressed. I believe feminism is partly to blame. What's your issue on there? And it's modern man is depressed for a variety of reasons, partially because we don't have our own space, and not to take a Baptist approach or a BAP approach, but I mean, we are flabby, we are drug addled, we are in a situation that wants you to mindlessly consume and not create. I mean, feminism doesn't help in the way that you now have men and women now competing for the same kinds of jobs. Women not wanting to make families. I mean, the same way that men don't want to make families. We're far more materialist than we ever have been in the past. So, I mean, there's some partially things to blame there, but there's a variety of problems as well. If you're going to ask the question, why is modern man depressed? That video better be an hour and a half long to answer that question, because if not, then blaming it on one problem is reductive. I'm not a fan of root cause debate, because root cause debate is inherently, it never addresses a multifaceted issue correctly. So it would better be an hour and a half long video at that point. Kurds let their women fight their battles. Imagine being this pathetic. I mean, I wouldn't be too quick on that, considering what the Soviets did with their women. That field when there are over 200,000 more men than women in the 1834 cohort range in Poland. Yikes. So does that mean Poland has an incel problem? Pedro, I'm going to tell you no for a variety of reasons, is because the most targeted groups inside the Middle East is going to be Christians. So you can say that evangelicals are continuing to colonize Algeria, but I mean, Christians are the most targeted religious group in the Middle East, and by extension, the world in that area. The growth can be rapid, but there will be clamped down, and they'll still be treated as outsiders. I don't see it happening. What are my thoughts on the 6th? So, I mean, my thoughts of it was that people were exercising their last avenue of recourse after being denied every political and legal avenue to redress their grievances for what happened in November. And in doing so, they were treated like domestic terrorists, despite the fact that the courts and our political system systematically denied them every kind of ability to have a redress of grievances through traditional social and political means. They opted for the last thing that they had, which was protest. And our government responded in kind in the same way that it always does when the right protests, is that it does something to aggravate the dog until the dog barks and bites, and then the dog gets shot by the cops. And that's exactly what happened on the 6th. So when I hear people say that this was the greatest attack on our democracy, no, the greatest attack on our democracy has been happening since the first election in 1788, when we had Hamilton change, the minds of certain electoral college voting members to sway their votes away from Washington so it wouldn't look unanimous. America has had a long history of that kind of skullduggery in our electoral process. So our attacks on democracy comes from all those kinds of attacks, not these people protesting because they know something legitimately fucked up happened and were gaslit and told by their leaders that no, everything was fine and fair and square, despite the fact that we could see it with our own eyes. So those are my thoughts on that issue, is that those people are going to be, those who protested will be targeted and hunted down for doing what any reasonable person would do when they have no other options, which is protest and take to the streets. China is completely screwed, lol. I think in 15 million more men under 30 than women. China. Oh, no, this is what we talked about a couple of weeks ago about the Chinese question, is that there's a huge demographic time bomb, both in terms of young people and old people. And this is where you and I will maybe agree on this issue, is that you have roughly 330 million people, so roughly the size of the population of the United States, that are over 65. Most of them aren't working. There's no strong social security safety net like we have here in the West, in addition to the fact that you have the Chinese cultural practice of the young taking care of the elderly. Add in the fact that all these young people have to work and are not having kids. You are now seeing a demographic time bomb that is going to blow up in their face when they can't project power. Not in the way that they want to, which is trying to match the naval presence of the United States. And they can't do that, not on a technological level, and they will soon won't have the manpower, which is why they're trying so hard to quell domestic, ethnic and nationalist attitudes of various regions in China. We're focusing on the Uyghurs, but I mean, they've done this with other groups in the past, whether it's with the Islamic population and others. I mean, there will be a huge ethnic problem inside Russia. And the fact that they do not engage in really any kind of immigration is all the more indicative that that problem is only going to persist in the next 10 to 15 years. I mean, they can, and they have been importing him, but I mean, it ain't happening. It ain't happening. Not at the rate that they'll need. Not at the rate that they'll need. Importing, yeah, exactly, in quotations. Locke asks, best frog names. I don't know. I love them to death, but I don't own any. I guess you would treat them in the same way that you would name a dog. Just whatever feels right, as long as it's something that's not fake and gay, just go with that. Chinese men seem to shop around Thailand and Vietnam for women, so just like rich Westerners. I mean, it's not like anything's changed. And I mean, I'm not surprised that they're doing that either, especially now that you have a market economy that allows you to afford sex tourism. I'm not surprised that the Chinese are doing that in the same way that rich Westerners do it. Buying a Korean wife from Kim is kind of based. Disavow. But we're going to move on to the end here. So last time we did this, we talked about the White's tree frog. So we're also picking another popular frog that's adopted as a pet. This is the Pac-Man frog, named for the titular video game character. They're primarily found in Central and South America and Paraguay, Uruguay, and Brazil. They're very popular as pets. They are incredibly poor swimmers. Do not put them in water. They have huge mouths, very round bodies. They're cute as a button. They're just giant little green potatoes. They're very cute. They prefer dark, in damp, humid environments. You need to keep it very warm, usually 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And they have a 7 to 10 year lifespan. And their diets consume mainly of flax and mealworms, crickets, and of course, various vegetation in the area. And I think that these guys are absolutely adorable. They're just these cute little round things with these short, stubby legs and these big old eyes that just pop up. They're absolutely great. But yeah, those are the Pac-Man frogs. I agree. China's screwed. China actually has a fake marriage gangs going around here where men will take a bunch of women and sell them off to marry them, disappear in the middle of the night. So this is okay, Red. So this is actually a fun thing that I think you might enjoy. Is that there's been sort of this progressive neoliberal foreign policy shtick where the argument is that because a lack of access to women is a thing, you're going to see more terrorism and organized criminal activity in those regions. And their argument that they cite for this is Boko Haram, where like the lack of women in bride price is the reason why men join up for these terrorist groups, because there's a promise of women. And so far, they've been very right on this analysis. And their whole argument is like, oh, well, the way that we fix this is through women's rights and empowerment. And it's like, no, the way that you fix this is stop, sex selective abortion and, try to encourage gender parity in like the birth rate. And then there being more women for men to get a hold of. And the other thing, of course, is that you end the practice of polygamy. But of course, no one's ready to have that conversation yet, because one of the greatest inventions of sort of like civilization, I'm not even talking about like the West, because this is apparent in most modern cultures, is that once you institutionalize monogamy, violence goes down in civilizations dramatically. And once you manage to accomplish that, and you sort of end polygamy and polyamory being sort of the de jure and de facto way of living is for men, you significantly reduce violence and you significantly improve the status of your civilization or city. But I mean, yeah, China has got the same sort of problem that North Africa does. Robert Chalk asks, what would be scarier, giant spiders or giant frogs? Big enough that humans are food. I would probably say that the spider. And I only say this because I guess more people are more afraid of spiders than they are frogs. I mean, no one's made a movie about a giant frog that eats people. I mean, there has been a movie about giant spiders. It's called Eight-Legged Freaks. We don't need to enforce monogamy. Just stop funding polygamy through welfare. I mean, yeah, a reduction in that sort of stuff would be helpful. But I mean, it would also help if we ended no-fault divorce. This is sort of the social conservative in me coming out now, ouchie. Like, a lot of the problems that we see about widespread marital problems and childlessness or single parent households comes after the advent of no-fault divorce in the West, which is why you need sort of institutional monogamy to be more appropriately enforced. And that's the trad in me talking, but there's a big argument to make for that. Untrue, there are several killer frog movies. There are an endless morass of killer animal movies. I mean, there is, but to me, if you were to tell me that there are a bunch of movies about killer frogs, I'm just thinking like B movies, really shitty 80s B movies. Prudentialist, will you create a movie about a giant frog that eats people? No, because I don't want to do that, and I like frogs, and I don't want them to be portrayed as evil. I already get enough shit as it is. Since they brought it on themselves, the one-child policy, they should fix it through. Yeah, but that would be telling this incredibly like patriarchal society to stop sex-selective abortion. Like, it's not going to happen. I bet he hasn't seen The Demon of Song. I've played Dark Souls 2. I know exactly what you're referencing. But I mean, that's more of a face with a frog skin on it more than really anything else. Also, Dark Souls 2 is the worst Dark Souls, and I'll find anyone who says otherwise. Also, guarantee a father's right to have a DNA test if he's suspicious. Oh, I agree with that. Honestly, I don't think we need to worry about the incel problem. Those genes will be deselected in 100 years. There really won't be incels in any significant way. I mean, yeah, I mean, dysgenic traits are going to be dysgenic and maladaptive for a reason. There's I mean, they're right on the grounds that it's not like they have a phenotype that's attractive. So by that extension, they're going to be, eventually just weeded out of the gene pool, whether they like it or not. Now, if the commies get their way and they want like state mandated girlfriends or state mandated like sex therapists to allegedly reduce violence, I'd love to see how that's going to work. But I mean, yeah, the maladaptive and dysgenic traits usually get weeded out, so we don't have to worry about that. Yeah, he is. I'm not it felt like a very generic fantasy hack and slash rather than a Dark Souls game. And mechanically, I wouldn't even argue that it is a Dark Souls game just because its healing mechanics with life gems fundamentally break the game. And that's how it is. How to fight giant frogs, piles of salt. They're not slugs, though. That's not how it works in status and activity or zero scum games. I mean, yes, but most people are inevitably pick, and that's sort of the funny thing, right? Is that people inevitably, stick within their own range. They stay in their lanes. Like, maybe this is me just talking out loud, but like based on my observations, like 6s usually stay around the 4, 5s, and 6 ranges. 7s through 10s usually mix and mingle with each other. So it becomes a matter of that. Not to mention that we all want to be with an attractive person. It's just how we are as humans. I mean, unless you're completely devoid of any sort of sexual interest, but it's just a long, awkward problem. And it's not even it is a problem, but it's not. The incel problem is just successful people bullying on those less fortunate. Changed my mind. I've never been aware of this, like, and this is my own ignorance, but like, it's not a problem that I care about, and it's not a problem that bothers me because I can talk to people. Like, maybe it just comes down to the two categories of those who got laid their senior year of high school and those who didn't, and that's where we're at, and that's the definition of the incel problem: those who can and those who don't, or those who couldn't. But I don't know. Like, I can talk to people. I'm not afraid of talking to women. I don't hate women. Like, women are great and all that jazz. So I don't see the problem. It's not something that I can comprehend. Like I am one of those guys that will literally tell somebody, just go talk to her for Christ's sake. And if not, I will happily give someone lessons in how to communicate and talk to people, not in a pickup artist's fashion, but how to not just be an autistic spurg and have a conversation of like, hi, my name is so-and-so. How are you? Like, it's not that hard. As a trad cath, I got laid by my... Oh, that's bad. That's a bad joke. Women are hard to find in blue states. Quote unquote women. Yeah, they either become female to male or the women have dicks. In my opinion, incels love stealing discourse to make it all about them. Yeah, I think it's a lot to deal with the fact that they're a bit narcissistic. Like, oh, woe is me. My jawline isn't built like Giga Chad. What am I going to do? And it's just like, ugly people find love, man. Ugly people find love. My favorite couple in the whole wide world is these 2 middle school, high school teachers that I used to play some board games with back when I lived in El Paso. They are the ugliest fucking people alive, but they love each other to death. And they are just made for each other in their own sort of just dysgenic, ugly appearances. And I love them to death because they're happy, they're nerdy, they have a kid that doesn't seem ugly. And it's proof that ugly, dysgenic people can find love. So I think incels just need to sack up and understand that they're probably a 2 or a 3. They're going to marry a 2 or a 3, and they just need to fucking accept it. That's my opinion. So quit being a narcissist. They're the ugliest fucking people alive. I mean, they are. Men open up and bitch about their jawlines. Incels could be based if they just swore off sex and focused on something more based like monks. Yeah, see, this is why we need to bring back monasteries. Bring back monasteries, make these people take a shower, shave, get a haircut, just all that fucking problem. The funny thing is, the Prudentialist, the guy from the Giga Chad meme is a version. Yeah, I saw that meme floating around from the CNN article. I don't know if that's true or that's just a meme that's going around. I like to believe that it is, that he's this amalgamation of all these unknown sort of weird esoteric social norms and just doesn't know what a podcast is. I'm glad that he's living his best life and not on the internet. I think it's for the best. Um, but yeah, like what a variety of rants and things that we've gone on today and talked about. Yeah, it doesn't look real, but I hope it is. I hope so too, just because that would be the ultimate W in Giga Chad's corner. Are frogs Chads? Yes. Have we seen what Pepe the Frog did to an entire election in the United States in 2016? Frogs are definitely Chads. They can live on water, they can live on land. Yeah, they're Chads. The thing is, most people can look attractive if they took care of themselves. Absolutely. Oh no, he's very real. Just we don't know anything about him. He's kind of isolated and whatnot. JPB could have started a secular monastery and solved the West's incel problem. Changed my mind. Do you mean like JBP, like Jordan B. Peterson, or are you referring to somebody else? But yeah, toads are incels, frogs are chads. If someone can do a meme of Virgin versus Chad with toads and frogs, you would forever win in my heart. But as we're nearing the end of the show, I'm gonna share and I'm gonna shill for a little bit and then we'll wrap up. So for right now, how to support the show is that you can find me on Subscribestar. This is where I'm at, and we're about 75% of the way to be towards monetization. I'm putting out the content so we can all work on our total watch time. That way we can be open for monetization in the future. But for right now, this is the way that you can support me. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at 2pprudential. I'm also working on getting an account on Minds and Gab. And I'm slowly uploading my catalog and library of videos onto BitChute. I'm also working on making an Odyssey account. So I'm going to be all over the place as well. I'm also on Telegram at The Prudentialist. I have a little small channel there. I'll put that out on Twitter later. But this is where you can find me. And if this is where you want to support me, this is the way that you can do it. And as always, every Sunday we put out a video, or I do a stream here on some sort of international relations topic. This is where I usually talk about the news and history. And of course, scripted videos come out every week or so. Sometimes I do an unscripted Monday morning musings. I've been more wanting to do less unscripted stuff and more just recording rants and what's on my mind, sort of like with the real talk stuff when I go fishing. So this is what I do. And I'm going to start putting more and more stuff on Odyssey in the future. But yes, if you're interested in supporting me, you can find me on Subscribestar. And of course, the biggest thing that I would appreciate, as always, is just liking and sharing this stuff. If you can spread it around and get more and more people to watch it, that's even better, because the higher engagement we get, the more people actually watch it, the more likely the channel is to grow in the future, and I to keep up and maintaining all of this work that we do here. Like I said in the past, I don't want to make this a money thing or a grift thing. I do this because I like it. I do this because I want people to be encouraged to act and be involved in their local communities and to be aware of the political philosophy in the world around us and our history and our countries and our international relations. I think the fact that we've delved away from the knowledge of men and sort of the classics of literature, history, and politics, and more towards this materialist, consumerist mindset has been a disaster for ordinary people. And so I think if we can do just a little bit of our time every week, every day to be more informed, be more aware of esoteric knowledge, I think the better off we'll be in the future. Yeah, I'm considering alt tech only stuff. I'm actually considering even uploading my library to Dailymotion as well. I don't think I'm big enough yet for alt tech exclusives, although I will start doing more content uploaded simultaneously on alt tech. So people, if they prefer to be on Odyssey or Rumble or BitChute, then they have that opportunity. And that's what I plan on doing in the future. But yeah, like I said, I'm still figuring all this stuff out. I'm still figuring out Telegram. I'm still figuring out the best way to make these things work. Um, so it depends. Red asks, "What are my thoughts on Keith Woods? The guy has some of the best right wing commentary I have seen." I have not watched enough of Keith to really know. I've seen a couple of his appearances on other people's streams and conversations, but I don't know enough about him to really give you an opinion. And I mean, I'll watch some of his stuff. I know that he's done a video about why he's a third positionist, which is not where I come from. But I mean, that's how it is. Does an Odyssey synchronize YouTube content pretty much instantly? Well, if that's the case, even better. So I need to finalize making my account and getting to work. But yeah, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm doing. I'm still, I hate the meme doing the work because it just sounds like a way to say that you're doing something without doing anything at all. But like, I like to think that I'm taking the necessary steps to grow, and I will always take the steps that I can to like, your feedback is always appreciated. Like your comments when you guys have conversations in the comment section, or like and share. It's always, to me, that helps more than anything. Like, you can watch a video and you can say that I saw this. That's great. But I mean, the things I know I need to work on is engagement. I need more people watching, and I need to network with others to help the channel grow and succeed in the future. And you guys help, at least in guiding me in the directions that I need to be in. But, oh, Ian, you did ask a question. I'm sorry. Thoughts on Andrew Jackson? I mean, he is the quintessential American populist. And DC Perspective actually has done a lot of great work on Andrew Jackson when he talks about things like the Trail of Tears. So, I mean, I have a positive opinion of Andrew in terms of a populist perspective, in terms of governments. He was an American hero of his time, and I don't think he really did anything wrong. So there you go, Locke. I did my best to answer your Andrew Jackson question. Don't worry, I try my best to make sure everyone else gets their chance to talk with everybody and get their questions answered. And when we do get monetized, don't feel obligated to ask your questions in the super chats. I like just talking with everybody. I want everyone to feel involved. I don't think that's a spicy take. Like, DC Perspective will point out, like, if you take a look at the Trail of Tears, less than 10,000 people were, had died, and it was already taking place before Jackson took office. Like, there is a significant amount of, historical revisionism that comes around Andrew Jackson as a populist, rather a reaction to the Washington system at the time, because you had the John Quincy Adams's election and how shady that shit was. So yeah, old Hickory did nothing wrong. But yeah, again, what I would recommend in the future, both on Twitter and here on YouTube, if you guys can do your best to comment and tell me what it is that you guys want to see more of in the future, whether that's history, whether that's international relations, or just scripted takes, do let me know. And like I said, whatever I need to start doing to make better content for higher engagement, I will take advice and I will take suggestions. I would greatly appreciate that. But yeah, so this is what I've got planned for the future. And of course, Prudent Reads will be on the 1st of May, with Aaron McIntyre. Will be going over Spengler's Decline of the West, Volume 1. And then after that, it'll be Machiavelli's The Prince. And I think I'll have Mr. Patriarch on there as well. And the next weekend, I'll be on Mr. Patriarch's channel doing a stream there. So I will just try my best to get more content out for you guys, whether that's live streams, whether that's videos. I plan on doing the Sunday stream every Sunday around this time frame. So this is what's going on. I will be doing more international relations content here. I think that this is a good thing to talk about, especially from a realist foreign policy perspective. This is the worst time to start a channel on YouTube, but I wish you luck. Yeah, I mean, Uh, that's true. I mean, I it is definitely the worst time now that it's like it would have been a great time to start a channel like 5 years ago, right before Trump got elected, and then just enjoying the politics of that era. But I didn't think I could do it at that time, and now that I'm in a position where I think I can do it, I mean, I'd rather keep going. But I want to thank you all for stopping by, and I will have a video out this week. And until then, I will see you all next time. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Sunday. And as always, be prudent, everybody. I'll see you then.